There's the cue, everybody. Well, welcome. My trusted confidant and introducer, Kristen, is not with us today, so I'm doing this solo. So welcome, everybody. It's so good to have you here. Here's how the deal works. We have an hour and a half. I will present for somewhere between 50 and 60 minutes. That will be recorded, as has been recorded, and then we'll shut the recorder off and we will have a dialogue for half an hour. And the dialogue will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you can stay around for the conversation, we welcome you to turn your cameras on at that point. We just have a good dialogue. If you're not able to stay past the hour, no problem. Just look after yourself today. Now, for those of you who have your camera on, you will notice that some of us are wearing orange shirts. And if you are living outside of the country, you may not know this, but I want to share with you the reason why some of us today are wearing orange shirts. Acknowledgement of truth and reconciliation. I just want to read a brief statement here before we start. Acknowledgement of truth and reconciliation is a fundamental step towards building a more inclusive and just society. It acknowledges the dignity and humanity of those who have suffered, and it lays the foundation for a future where justice, equality, and reconciliation can thrive. We as a nation solemnly acknowledge the truth of our history. We recognize the profound injustices, trauma, and pain endured by Indigenous peoples whose cultures, lands, and communities were subjected to generations of systemic oppression, dispossession, and cultural genocide. We recognize that reconciliation is a shared responsibility, and we call upon all Canadians to engage in this process with open hearts and minds. We must confront prejudice, challenge stereotypes, and actively dismantle the barriers that continue to hinder progress toward true equality. Together, we aim to build a Canada where all peoples, regardless of their background, can thrive in a spirit of unity, respect, and understanding. This is our collective commitment to truth and reconciliation, a promise to create a more just and inclusive future for us all. So I start with that statement because it is absolutely my commitment to do so and to be a part of that commitment. All right, let's get going here on getting your team in sync. Before we start, I want to be totally upfront and transparent with all of you that really I'm sharing with you these webinars to let people know about our 4-day Authentic Leadership Academy in partnership with the University of Calgary. We invite you to consider this. If you want to go deeper with this material, we invite you to research this, and we'll have all the links for you available. But we invite you, if you want to go deeper with this material, this is available for you. So we're going to talk about teamwork today, and I just want you to know I've been in this business for 40 years, working with teams, working with leaders, working with organization and organizational development. This is a cross-section of some of the companies and organizations that I've worked with probably in the last half a dozen years or so. So I still welcome an opportunity to come in. If you can do everything that I teach you today, you can do it on your own. But if you need some support, feel free to reach out to me, and we'll make sure that we get one of our team members to give you a hand. But if you want to just reach out and say, you know, how would I apply this principle in our own team? Feel free to reach out to me. Val's email address will be in the chat room, and we'll schedule a call and be happy to have a conversation with you to make this real for you. And, you know, I've been asked often, when am I going to retire? And until I can find something better in my life, I'm having too much fun. I still enjoy this work. This is really my life's work, and I just enjoy the connection that I have with people. So we're going to go on a journey today, as always, and this is a very personal journey. I don't think you can talk about teamwork without getting personal about it. So here we are together, and I hope that you will trust that you will find some value in this. We're going to do three things. There's three themes really today. We're going to talk about the three commitments as a team leader. Now, I'm going to make it really clear that you could be a formal team leader, but you can also be an informal team leader. You can, you know, I've seen sometimes people can step up and lead their team without any kind of positional responsibility. But you have to be willing for me to find value, for you to find value in this, there's got to be 3 commitments that you have as a team leader, no matter what you do. The other thing I want to say is you can define your team in any way you want today. You might be the chair of a board of directors. It could be an executive team. It could be a sports team. It could be a community team. It could even be your family is a team. So you can apply this to any context. I don't think any of us do not work in some team somewhere in their work or their personal life. So you can apply this to any team. I would suggest, to make this real, that you pick a team that you're going to work with, to say, I'm going to identify this team and I'm going to strengthen the sync. I'm going to get the team that I'm in greater sync. Okay. So we're going to talk about the 3 commitments that are needed as a team leader. Number 2, we're going to assess the health of your team. I'm going to give you a tool. It's very simple tool to help you assess how healthy is your team. And then we're going to talk about strategies, specific strategies for getting your team in sync. All right, let's move ahead. 3 commitments. You got to be committed to transformation. You have to be committed to community, and you got to be committed to getting your team in sync. You probably aren't going to find much value in this presentation if that commitment isn't there. So first of all, let's talk about transformation. So there's always 2 aspects to every team. There's just like 2 aspects to every part of every aspect of your life. Any role that you have, there's a transactional aspect and there's a transformational aspect. In the context of teamwork, the transactional aspect is project management, establishing goals, managing expectations, delegating work, overseeing progress, measuring results, control. So this has been a part of the work that I have done over these past few years. It's not my strength. So if you only want to work on the transactional side, this probably is not going to be hugely valuable for you. It's vitally important, but my focus is going to be on the transformational side. Inspiration, connection, mentoring, service, values and vision, learning together, and unleashing the potential. And what you find is you have to be committed if you're really going to find, if there's going to be alignment working with me, there's got to be that commitment on your part to say, I want to work with the transformational side of my team. I don't want just this to be a transaction so that we produce better results. That has to be there. You can't also just work on the transformational side. We love each other. We're all inspired. We are having all kinds of fun. We're not getting any work done. Well, that's not going to cut it in most organizations, right? So you have to be able to do both. But I'll just let you know that my strength and commitment is on the transformational side, and that's required for you to find value in the work that we do together. The second commitment that you have to have is to turn your group into a community. Every team starts as a group. It's a group of people who come together. Now, maybe you're organized together. Maybe you've come together in a sports team, but you always come together in a group. And my commitment is, how do you turn that group into a community? Any teachers on this call understand that your job, you come together in September, you have a bunch of students that come together in September. It's called a classroom. It's called a group. You have a group of students together. Your job in that year that you have together is to turn that group into a community. And I would just ask you to stop and just reflect, just for a moment, the team that you've identified that you're either leading or are on and want to impact. Just stop and reflect. Where are you on that spectrum between a group and a community? How much of a community? What does community really mean to you? And the best way for me to describe a community is to tell you this story. Many of you have heard me tell this story. It was really profound. Just before the pandemic, I was in the States, and I ran a 4-day leadership retreat with a group of leaders at this hotel, and every employee in the hotel had a name tag. Now, that's not unusual, except that underneath the name tag was also their passion. So when this is not just our server, this is Jakia from Colombia, who has a passion to dance. And when she brought us our breakfast on the first day, we started a conversation. And, in between serving, she told us a story about how she ended up coming to this country, how she ended up coming to the United States from Colombia, and how she was a single parent, and what she went through to get here. And it was a whole story. And her story led to stories around the table where we started to talk about our passion. And every employee we ran into led to another story. Now you can say, well, you know, when do we have time to tell our stories? We got work to do. Well, the problem is we're so consumed with our work. If we don't make room for the stories, we don't make room for the transformational quality, what's going to end up happening is that we keep our group as a group instead of a community. And what's the cost of living in a group rather than having a community? When I left that hotel 4 days later, there was a tear in my eye, because we weren't just leaving a group, which is typical for a, you know, you come together in a hotel and you stay in this hotel and everybody's polite with each other. But what we left with is a sense of real community. And it's my premise that we don't stop and really build community with our team because we're just not intentional about that. And some of us aren't clear about how to do that. So those are the two commitments. And then the third commitment, the first commitment, the transformational side, a commitment to a community and getting your team in sync, which is really the tool for building community. Now, there's 3 areas that I will identify around getting your team in sync. And frankly, you can start anywhere. You know, this is a chicken and egg thing. You know, what comes first? Now, if you talk to Jim Collins and his work Good to Great, he'll tell you got to get the right people on the bus before you get them aligned. But I suggest, even though the research might support that, at least the research when he wrote his book, Good to Great, I'm not sure for me, I can get the right people on the bus unless I know what we're trying to get them aligned to. So to me, you can start anywhere, but I'm going to start, for the sake of simplicity here, I'm going to start with alignment, but you could start anywhere. So let's just first of all talk about alignment. By the way, when I talk about getting the right people on the bus, if you've used family as your team, you know, you're not in a position where you're going to be able to fire your kids and get different kids. I mean, we might some days all love to do that for those of you who are parents. Obviously, that's not going to work. And also, some of us have inherited teams and we just don't have, you know, we might live in a bureaucracy where you don't have the wherewithal, you don't have the positional authority to fire people and get it or help people move on to a different team. So you got to work with who you've got. There's always limitations if you don't have the right people. And we'll talk about managing those limitations. But let's talk about alignment first of all. First of all, you have to get aligned around purpose. Now, I'm going to suggest here that what we tend to do is that we tend to clarify, okay, what's the purpose of the team? Now, it's very critical that you get a clear purpose. There's nothing more frustrating than working on a team and people don't understand, why are we here? And sometimes teams get organized bureaucratically. In other words, they get organized, say, oh, you're on this team, you're on this team. And it really doesn't make any sense personally why we're on this team. So we need to stop and realize, why was this team formed? Now, I'm going to stress there has to be interdependence in order to call it a team. It's why a hockey team, for example, is easy to call a sports team a team, because there's no question that the defenseman, the defense needs the goalie, and the goalie needs the forwards, and the forwards needs the center. It's unarguable. That's why we call it a team. Everybody needs everybody to achieve the purpose. There's a high degree of interdependence. If you're organized and you don't need each other to achieve your purpose, then don't call yourself a team. You can call yourself a work group, but you have to need each other in order, in my definition, to call yourself a team. We all need each other to achieve our purpose. It isn't just nice to support each other. Now, what we could do to call it a team is redefine our purpose. Maybe it's a learning community. Maybe it's an executive team that has 40 members of the management team. This is very common. If you get an executive team, then you get a management team, and there's 40 people on the management team or 30 people on the management team. Well, there isn't interdependence necessarily between but there's pockets of teamwork where you have teamwork and you need a team. But as a whole, maybe you just need to redefine your purpose. What is that purpose? Maybe it's a learning group. Maybe, and then we'll support each other to learn when we come together. But there's not a high degree of trust that's necessary then. If it's a learning group, maybe it's a team to coordinate efforts so that we know what's going on in our own individual departments. But all I'm saying is take the time to clarify, what is our purpose? It doesn't matter what the purpose is. But make sure when you walk around the team, everybody can tell you, if you ask them, what's the purpose of the team? You got to have alignment around that. Now, here's the piece that is often missing, is to connect the team purpose with the individual purpose. And that's where you have to have some conversations. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? What is your own personal purpose? We get very pessimistic. I've seen a lot of pessimism with organizational mission statements. Okay, we got this mission statement. We don't have a mission yet, but we got this statement that we put up on the wall. And my experience is that mission statements really won't have much value for you until people have a sense of their own personal mission. What is your own personal mission statement? And how does your mission align with the mission of the team? That's an alignment process that has to have that conversation. If you really want to get your team in sync, make sure people's personal purpose. That's something that we're often never asked. You know, how often have we sat down in a team meeting in a preparation for our team alignment and said, what is your own personal purpose? And how does your own personal purpose align with the purpose of the team? So you have to know the purpose of the team, and then you have to have an alignment. Now, what if that alignment isn't there? Then you got the wrong people on the bus, and you have to really sit down and say, is this the right team? Now, maybe in the beginning, there isn't that alignment. Well, maybe you can work toward, can you create your own personal purpose where you can contribute to this team, redefine your own personal purpose in relation to your contribution to the team, so that you can begin to move toward alignment. There may not be alignment perfectly at the beginning, but I believe it's a team leader's, and again, this is your own personal job, if you're a contributor to this team, is to align your purpose on this team, or get honest with yourself and say, you know what, I really don't contribute to this team, and I'm not going to be a member of this team because I can't see how my own individual passion and purpose aligns with the purpose of the team. So I'm just saying, you're not going to get this perfect, but spend time committed to these conversations, because this is what creates alignment. And without this conversation, that alignment just goes off the rails. I love to tell this story. This is my daughter's soccer team that she played on for 16 seasons, including outdoor and indoor. This is an incredible team, this team of young ladies from Cochrane. And fundamentally, their three values, their real purpose was, we're going to have fun, we're going to create friendships, and we're going to work on the fundamentals. And everything else was detail. And, that was the values and the purpose that really aligned this whole team. And they never had tryouts, but they beat teams that had 100 young ladies trying out for their team. They beat some of the best competitive teams in the city, and we're just from this little town out here in Cochrane. But these leaders of this team created a team that said, you know what, we're going to build character. And I'm going to tell you, our daughter has friendships. My daughter went to a wedding of one of the, and it was the MC at one of the one of the girls that was on this team, 10 years later. So folks, this is the power of a culture on a team. When people come together with a common purpose and a common understanding, this is what we stand for. This is our purpose. So you can create whatever purpose is meaningful for you, but let's come together. And by the way, if I were coaching a sports team, I would involve the parents and say, what is the purpose of our team? So that we get real clear. First of all, the parents, and although this wasn't done with the parents there, but I'm going to tell you, the parents had way more investment in winning. When they lost, it was the parents that always got upset. The girls said, oh, let's go to Dairy Queen and have get a treat together, because we're going to move on to other things. And the paradox was, they were so relaxed and had so much fun that they were a superb team with a superb record. Okay. Anyway, enough about my bias toward that team. Secondly, you got to get aligned around values. And again, we got to know, and I'm going to give you a little process, a tool that you can use to get your team aligned around values. How will we treat each other on this team? And we're going to help you develop a team charter by the time we're out of this webinar today. How do you develop a team charter? But again, that's at the organizational stage. How will we treat each other? But at a personal stage, we need to align with our personal values. So we need to talk with our with our each member of that team to say what matters to you. How do your own personal values align with the values of this team, and make sure that there's a level of alignment. To the level of alignment, that to me is where you get engagement on a team. You don't get engagement through organizational values. You get engagement through personal values, and making sure that people's personal values and their gifts and their strengths can be aligned with the values of the team that they're on. This is what gets us inspired. This is what wakes us up. This is what gets us up in the morning. Okay. So take the time to have those value conversations. And we're going to delve deeply into this later. The last piece around alignment, it's got to be aligned around accountabilities. Now, again, this I can drill in. We could spend a day talking about how you align a team around what their accountabilities are. But it starts with personal accountability agreements. And I get into this in much more detail in our academy, but we talk about personal accountability agreements. And we have, I've spent, this is how I really got my career launched in the 90s, learning about these whole accountability process. But basically, we help people replace performance reviews, performance management, and this becomes their system for managing expectation. And it's a very simple process: clarity about what's expected, agreements at a personal level, support requirements. Every time you have an expectation from someone, there should be also a support. What do you expect from me? What do I expect from you? How will we hold each other accountable? What will be the consequences and the motivators? And how often do we need to talk to follow up on this? So this is called a personal accountability agreement. And then what you do is that you hold an alignment meeting where you bring your accountability agreements to the alignment meeting. You identify as a team, identify any gaps or overlaps. What are each of us accountable for? How will we reach our, how will we summarize the agreements that we have with each other, summarize the gaps and the overlaps, and overlaps, and then you negotiate agreements with each other to make sure that we're aligned around what we're agreeing to do, so that each person has their own personal accountability, but then they know how their own personal accountability aligns with the team's accountability. And that's how you get alignment around accountability. Now, again, I could get into this in much more detail. If you want to stay on the call after, and we can answer any more details. And this is basically, I spent 10 years helping people with alignment around accountabilities. The challenge for me, I learned all about accountabilities. The challenge for me is it just became too transactional. And you can turn this whole accountability process into just a pure transactional process. And that's where it began to break down for me personally. That's where the values alignment, and that's started with the folks that I was in business with when we talked about accountability, because I wanted to really move it toward the transformational side. And you can make this purely transactional if you want, but what engages us is the values and the purpose and getting that aligned. All right. So that's all I really wanted to say about alignment. We can return to that at the end if you want to stay on, and we can answer some more questions. The right people on the bus. All I really want to say about the right people on the bus is, if you have the position, if you're in a position to hire people on your team, it always makes a difference when you take the time to get the right people on the bus. And I always just say, and this isn't a hiring presentation, there's people on this call that are better at hiring than I am. In fact, I'm actually not very good at hiring, but I always bring in my team to help hire. So right now, for example, we are exploring the possibility, we have this person on the call, exploring the possibility of having someone take over I have a vice president of client care, Marg Barr. Many of you have dealt with Marg. She's been a superb leader on our team and a superb contributor on our team. She's not able to be with us this morning, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take my time to hire somebody that's going to move into and make the transition into her role. I mean, Marg is at the point where she's wanting to move on in her career, and she's at the point of, frankly, she's retiring. And when I say moving on in her career, she's in the position of wanting to change at her stage in life and wants to redefine herself. She will always have a seat open on our team, but she wants to find a different way to contribute. And we're just purely working her too hard right now. And although she's been amazing, we're hiring somebody to move into her place. But I'm going to tell you, it's probably going to take us about 2 months to hire to get the right person on the bus. The best companies that I work with will take 10 hours of interviews, 10 hours of observing, 10 hours of conversation, 10 to 15 hours of conversation, the best company. I know Disney takes 15 hours before they hire anybody. They have to come in and make sure there's a fit there. Hire for character, train for skills. Now, this is obvious if you require skills like engineering and accounting. If you require personal or trade skills, obviously you have to have those skills. You're not going to hire for character. If you're hiring a pilot in an airline, they say, well, they're a nice person, so we'll hire them to be a pilot. So there's an obvious sense that there's some jobs that require certain skills and capabilities. I get that, but we need to be very careful and mindful about hiring for character. I remember being down in, I was running a board retreat about 3 or 4 years ago down in San Francisco, and we just had superb customer service at every level in this hotel. And at the end of, while we were checking out, I asked the clerk, I said, do you all get customer service training? Do you get in-depth training at how to take care of customers? And she stopped and thought about it for a minute. She said, well, you know what? You can't really train somebody to be nice. What we do is that we hire nice people and then train them how to use the computer. And so this is, I would far rather work with someone who has learning to do on the skill side, but has the right attitude. So we use this little hiring model here where you have skills and attitudes. And when you have no skills and a poor attitude, we call that energy consumers, and essentially there's just a bad fit. These are the people that will take all of your energy in your teams. And then you have good skills, but a poor attitude. And these are what we call competent jerks. These are the people that are the hardest to manage, frankly. And then you get the role models who have a high skill level and the right attitude, and then you have potential role models. So what we're going to do is we're going to help you define what we mean by attitude, and define for when we hire people, what do we mean by a fit for attitude? And you really have to know what your values are and how you measure those values in order to hire that. And typically what we do is that we hire for skills and fire for attitude. That's historically what people have done. We post job descriptions in social media, and typically it's all around competence instead of the right attitude. But this is ultimately what's going to build your team, is to hire for the right attitude. I get it that many of us have inherited teams and we just got the wrong people on the bus, and there are some limitations in terms of how well you're going to get that team functioning without the right people. But ideally, what I'd like to suggest is put a lot of energy into getting the right people. Once you know what your purpose is, what your values are, what your accountabilities, and then you begin to get people aligned with getting the right people on the bus. All right. Now, I want to spend considerable time today talking about team health. And this is really the third component of this whole notion of getting your team in sync. Now, this notion of health was inspired by Patrick Lencioni, which I would refer you to his book. But smart teams, essentially, I've used some of my own terminology here, but smart teams have to do with operational excellence, planning, technology, rigor, finance, innovation. These are all smart teams. And again, these are necessary, but they're not sufficient to having your team in sync. We also have to attend to what we call the team health. And again, this is more on the transformational side. The smart team, again, goes back to the transactional side. The healthy team is on the transformational side. Now, this is what I'm going to define as a healthy team. What I would encourage you to do, it's just like your own personal health. If you don't take care of your own personal health, it's one of those things that's important, but it's not urgent. And so we tend to say, well, I'm too busy being smart. I know executives that are too busy being smart. How many leaders do you know in your organization that all their focus is on smart and they're not taking care of themselves? And what happens when you don't take care of your own health? In life, this is a life decision, right? To make sure that you make a priority to take care of your own health. And we neglect our own health, just like we can neglect the health of our team. Just like a team is a living entity. It's, organization, the root word of organization is organ. This is a living entity, and it has health, and it has energy. And we need to attend to that, just like we attend to our own health. Now, if I were to ask you, how would you define health in your own life? That would be very individual. you can define health for yourself, but how healthy do you find yourself? Well, the same thing is true with a team. I would get input from your team. How will we define health given our purpose, given our values? How will we define a healthy team here? What does health mean? And get input from everybody and define your own healthy team. This is mine, and you're welcome to use my outline for a healthy team. But I would define health as high trust, safe and caring, diverse, well-diversified. And I say around diversification, we need health. Healthy teams are diverse teams. Diversity doesn't guarantee health, but you will always see diversity on a healthy team. And it's just like an ecosystem. It's just like a biological system. If you look at a field, a healthy ecosystem, it has diversity of plants, diversity of growth. This is the same in human systems. But diversity isn't necessarily what we see. Don't just hire for diversity in what you see. Hire for diversity in how we think, how we feel, how we operate. Diversity isn't always just what you see. Personal responsibility, energy and engagement, minimal politics, clarity. These are ways that I define a healthy team. Now, again, I come back to Covey's notion about urgent and important. Health of a team is just like health in yourself. It's important to take care of the health of your team, but it's not urgent. It's urgent to be smart. And so the smart always will take priority if we're not intentional. The transaction there's a gravitational pull in organizations and in life that it will always move toward the urgent. For those of you who have kids, the urgent is the homework that has to be done and getting your kids to do their homework. That's the urgent. The important is, how is the relationship as you do that? How is the connection that you have with your kids? How's the transformational side? And so there's an emphasis on the health of your team is one of those things that's important. But if you don't take care of it, it will become urgent. It's important, but it's not urgent. I don't know enough. I don't know a lot about NASCAR and about race car driving, but I know that race cars win as much in the pit stop as they win on the track. And so what we're saying is you've got to have a pit stop. So many teams are just so busy and so inundated with the tyranny of the transaction, they never take a pit stop. And if you don't stop and have pit stop conversations, you can't just, run your team into the ground without stopping and getting what I call having these pit stop conversations. What would happen to a NASCAR? I know enough about race car driving to know if you don't stop and get a pit stop, you're going to burn yourself out. And then what we tend to do in teams is we just burn people out and then just get a new car and then wonder why people just get burned out and leave, or else worse yet, they quit and stay. And I'm going to suggest, I know that most of us work in hybrid environments now. I don't think there's any difference between the connection that people have to take, between the attention. I understand there's a difference when people aren't in the job and aren't in the office. And I know these tools are important when, in perhaps easier to use when we're in an environment, when we're in person. But I've learned that you can really do this online. You can do this. You just have to be very intentional about it. And this is negotiating, but we definitely have to be more flexible with people today who want to stay home and work from their home. And we have to be flexible if that's part of their values. This is part of that value conversation. But don't negate the values of the organization that says, no, we also need you here because the chemistry in our team is also important. We need to be in person, face to face, to do that. So the whole notion of entropy, I think this is a law of thermodynamics. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. If you took a physics class, you probably learned about the word entropy. Everything is breaking down. The building that you're in right now is breaking down, and it has to be, you've got to put energy to keep it, because the natural state is that things break down. It's a law of thermodynamics. So if I have an apple in my hand, I set this apple on my desk, it's not going to look like an apple 6 months from now. It breaks down. I got to put energy into it. So if we don't put energy into the health of our team, we will experience entropy on that team. And here are some indicators of an organizational entropy. Polite replaces genuine. The opposite of engagement, folks, is not disengagement. The opposite of engagement is polite. And if you're seeing politeness on your team, now, granted, we are Canadian up here, and we are polite. I'm not saying not to be polite, but I would far rather be genuine than if polite runs our conversation, it's a sign of entropy. I'm not going to invest in this polite. I'm just going to be polite. Emails replace conversation. There's no time for celebration or enjoyment. There's tension. Manuals and policies run your organization. Problem makers outnumber problem solvers. Leaders seek to control rather than to liberate, and pressures push aside people. Notice when these indicators are there. It's just like when you don't take care of your own health, you're going to see indicators of entropy. Well, these are the indicators, and you could come up with your own list. But if you're seeing some of these indicators, it means likely you have not paid attention to the health of your team, because by default, there's a gravitational pull toward entropy, where you will move toward these indicators, these symptoms, if you're not attending to the health of your team. So here I want to walk you through a little process here for how to assess the health of your team. So how will you define the health of our team? How will we define? So this is a question that I would sit down and talk with your team about and ask them to brainstorm. How will we, again, this is a pit stop conversation. Well, we don't have time to talk about this. Well, if you don't have time to talk about this and address it head on, you're going to end up with the transactional side, and you're going to get people disengaged. You're going to get entropy. So you got to make time for it. And you got to make time either upfront or you're going to make time downstream. But either way, you got to make time for it if you want to get your team in sync. So have your team define health. And you could brainstorm, 30 things, and then you can have, you could brainstorm 30 ways that we could define health. Well, let's move it down to 5 or 6. And then you could have people vote, how would we define health? And these essentially can become your values. And I suggest, even if the organization has value statements, I think every team needs to define their own values for how we're going to work together. And it might be a short-term team, it might be a long-term team, but we got to define how are we going to value our relationships. Just make sure that your values aren't in misalignment with the macro culture. So I'm talking about a micro culture here on your team. You all live in a macro culture. Now, I want to just say this, that if in the macro culture, you don't need the support of the macro culture. You just need to make sure that the macro culture isn't going to sabotage and destroy your efforts. And if that happens, if the senior executive team, for example, doesn't support this work that you want to do to create a healthy team, then you have a values misalignment. And then you have to ask yourself whether this is the right team to be in. It's no different than a marriage. Some of you have, in a significant relationship, and you want to create a healthy team, you don't need the support of your spouse, but what you do need is the support of your significant other. At least you need them not to sabotage the process, not to interfere. And you just need to say, can you just step back and let me do? I'm happy to do it. Now, ultimately, it's always better if you work together on this, but sometimes that cooperation isn't there, and there may be a values misalignment in your significant relationship. And this is not a marriage course, but I do want to say that this is applicable to families. So I'm going to say, again, if you're on, you can use my definition of a healthy team. So I'm going to use, for example, just for the sake of simplicity here, I'm going to define a healthy team as these 7 areas. And then what you say is this: how on a scale of 1 to 10 healthy is our team? And what is your rationale? And you just go around the circle. You just go around the team and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would we give this? Now, if you want to really break this down, there's likely going to be different numbers for different aspects of your team. And that's fine. If there's diversity in terms of how you rate these, that can be all part of your answer. Or you can just give kind of a general overview. For example, if you give a number 7, for example, and say, well, I think we have a high trust team, but you know what? I think we rate low on the diversity. I think we all think alike, and we all agree with each other too much, and we're all polite, and we don't do the hard stuff, and we need more diversity on our team. So that's that could be part of the conversation. Now, I always say, what's the worst number you can get? And well, it looks on surface that the worst number you're going to get is a 1, but you know what? You'll never get a 1, because if people, 1 would be, by the way, so toxic that people are sick getting to work and working on this team. And I'm telling you, being on a team will impact your personal health. Or you could say a 10 would be, man, I'd rather be in this team than I would be in my significant relationship in my life. So those are two extremes, but you define for yourself what a 1 is and what is 10. Well, if that's the case, what's the worst number? Well, you'll never get a 1, because people won't say, if it's a 1, they're not going to feel safe enough to tell you that it's a 1. So I always say the worst number you can get is a 5, because that's a polite number. That's a polite number, and that's always a political number. So if you get a lot of 5s when you go around if you go around the room and have people, that's always okay, what's going on? That's a red flag for me. I would far rather have, and again, this is the conversation. Was this conversation polite or genuine? Now you can have people pair up with somebody you feel safe with, and tell what number would we give our team, and then you come back as a whole group and ask yourself, was this a polite number or a genuine number? And would we have this with everybody in our culture on this team? Would we have the same conversation that I had when I paired up? Would we have the same conversation when we came back as a whole group? And again, watch out for polite. Be very attentive for polite. And it's a trap, because, well, nobody's in conflict, nobody's fighting, there's not big destructive tension. We're good. Yeah, we're good. Be careful. Be careful. Are people real with each other? I would far rather have a genuine 2 than a polite 8 or 9. Okay. So watch that. And if you're sensing polite and you're sensing people holding back, I'll show you what you can do with that. Who's accountable for the health of this team? And typically what we say is the person who's in a leadership role is accountable for the health of the team. And then we complain. We institutionally deny the fact that each of us is actually creating the culture that we so enjoy complaining about. The ultimate act of accountability is to recognize that I am the one to change the culture, and to recognize that it's up to me. It's like when you walk into the culture of a retail store, the culture isn't something that someone does to you. Your contribution, how you respond to the customer service person, has as much to do with that culture. You're in that culture. Let's own the culture that we're on. We're owning the culture of the team that we're on. And what can we do to move it up a notch in the coming month? And you can do this with your own leadership, by the way, to create safety on your team. If you're noticing that there's politeness on the team, I would look, first of all, before you get to the health, before you make that a healthy team, I would say, change your leadership and say, what can I do as a leader to move it up a notch in the coming month? What would we do? Don't move it from a 5 to a 10. What could we do to move it from a 5 to a 6 in the coming month? And you get little actions like this to start, and just work on your own leadership before you even work on the team. If you're noticing a prevalence of politeness, say thank you. Thank you for your feedback, no matter what. Thank you. What actions or expectations are required from me as your team leader, or from each other? And what agreements will we make to each other? Now, I'm going to tie this into a team charter here in a few minutes, but just plant a seed here in terms of what you do with this. All right, so how do you sustain this? Motivation gets you started. Habits, what keep you going? Habits build your culture. Habits build your life. So if you want to sustain, just like if any one of you on this call, I said, how many of you would define that that you're pretty healthy right now, according to your definition of health? Any hand that I see go up. What I know is you don't get there by accident. If you're healthy in your life, you have habits. That's what creates health in life. Health habits, rest habits, exercise habits, nutrition habits, who you hang out with, what are your friends? These all impact your health. And whether you are explicit about it or not, they happen with habits. And the same thing is true when you're working with a team. You're working with the habits of that team. So I'm going to give you a few habits on your team that make it strong. First of all, make the vision and your values simple and visual. Trouble is, that's only step one. That a lot of teams end there, and that's not a great habit. But you still have to make them visible. This is what we stand for. These are our values. Now, every value have some behaviors, so that you have your value statements within a half a page, where you have, these are the values and this is what we expect from each other. Okay, and then I'll talk about how you hold them accountable. Make time for pit stop conversations. Make time to say, we're gonna make room for these kind of conversations. Tell the stories. I learned from WestJet, back when WestJet really had a good culture back in the 1990s, when Clyde Beddoes started that culture. I learned they never started a meeting without a story. And the story had to illustrate where on this team did we live one of our values. Shine a light on those successes. Shine a light on what we're doing right. They used to have a kudos. I don't know if they still do. I suspect not. I haven't worked with WestJet for years. But I suspect they have a kudos. They had at that time a kudos committee. And these were 5 people that flew around the WestJet world. And all they did was catch people doing things right. And then they'd write their story, whether it was a flight attendant in Winnipeg or a pilot in Vancouver or a baggage handler in Calgary. They got the story and they sent it around to 8,000 of their employees at that time. And that was their sole purpose on this committee, was to send along the story and shine a light on it. Make room. If you want to build whatever value you want to say on your team, maybe it's how we care about each other. Whatever story that is. And I don't care whether you're doing this virtually or whether you're doing this in person. Make room before your operational meeting to stop and say, how are people doing? How are people feeling? Maybe a one word, how are people feeling? And what's the story we've got that would reinforce? Define some meaningful team health habits that you'll commit to. How will we commit to our health habits? Now, I got to tell you, one of the highlights this last year is we took our team out on the Bow River last fall on a fishing trip. Now, you may not have the resources to do that, but it was a huge investment in our team, where we got a chance to get out. Now, you don't have to spend money eating together, a potluck, partying together, learning together, celebrating together, successes and birthdays, get away together. I know Kristen right now is on a trip. She works in an organization that's taken the senior leadership team away up in the Kananaskis for a spa trip. That's what they're doing while we're here. Get away together, do something together that pushes your boundaries, but you also want to respect boundaries. And I also want to make it very clear that to make a good team, like a good marriage, like any good relationship, requires 2 things. You have to have connection, but you also have to have individuation. You have to have a right for people to say, I don't want to participate in this, or I'm not able to participate in this. That we have to respect individuality. And you have, like any good marriage, you got to be strong individually, and you also have to be strong together. Don't lose your individuality. Don't lose your authentic voice for the sake of the team. And if you get too individuated, then you get separated. But if you get too connected, then you get enmeshed in your relationship. And either extreme does not lead to a good, sustainable team. Okay? And embrace the negative. And I just want to say this, that it's, while you focus and shine a light on success, you also want to embrace the negative. And so if these are your values get turned into behaviors, get turned into expectations, get turned into agreements. But this is what we call your claim. These are your values. This is what we claim to be here. But there's always a gap in reality. How many of you have ever heard this statement? They don't walk their talk around here. There's not congruence there. Well, I have news for you. We all have a discrepancy between what we claim and how real we behave. And I can use a very simple example. If anybody here tells me that they're healthy and that you can define health, how many of you in the last week will tell me that every single decision you made was in alignment with your value of health? We always are misaligned with what we claim, not because we intend to, and it's not because we're unethical, it's because we're human. And it's my premise that it's not the problem isn't that leaders don't walk the talk. Now, granted, if leaders don't want to walk the talk, if they're not committed to walking the talk, frankly, they shouldn't be there, because their life is not aligned with the values of the organization. But most leaders in a civil society are committed to walking the talk, but they may be perceived as not walking the talk. And frankly, if your values aren't tested under pressure, you haven't gone deep enough. So you need to be able to say, you know what, that decision you made, we talk about respect on our team. That decision you made the other day wasn't respectful. And then what is important is to have the discussion in an accountable way and to discuss the undiscussable, to discuss the gap between the claim and reality. And that's what I mean by embracing the negative. Set yourself up so that those team members will tell you, have a team member that says, Dave, that you didn't seem aligned with your values. Yesterday I was presenting in an organization, and the technology was a wreck, and it just didn't meet my expectations, and I got very frustrated. And my whole talk was on caring, and I was not very caring to the guy who was there at the venue setting the place up. I didn't get good service, and it didn't meet my expectations. And I always say, expectations are premeditated resentments. And I just picked up all kinds of frustration. And I was there to talk about caring. Well, I had to say, what I'm claiming to be today. I said, I started my talk by saying, it's really hard to care when you are under stress. And you just talk about it, and it doesn't excuse behavior, but it does say we're all human and we need to be able to discuss our discrepancies. Okay. How do you sustain the health of your team? Finally, create a team charter. And this is what I kind of want to end off with, is this notion of a team charter and developing a team charter. And what you do is you can do this. I always recommend you get off site, do this at least a half a day to do this if you can. But you could even do it on site, providing that you set some boundaries and really have some time to do this. And basically what you do is you brainstorm, what do we expect from each other on this high performing team? This is a brainstorming session, and people write down individually, what do I expect from everybody on this team? It could be as simple as coming to meetings on time. It could be, hey, it could be honesty. If we feel like something is awry, if we feel like we're out of sync, we can be honest with each other. And then once we individually, then what you do is that you list this and put them up on, you can put them on stickies, all these, and then you prioritize your expectations. What are the 5 to 7 most important expectations that we've identified? And you put them up on a board, and then you categorize them, and then you could vote on them and say, okay, if you had 5 votes, maybe there's 30 expectations up there, 5 votes, which ones would we vote for? And then you pick the most important 5, and then you get somebody to go away. You'd never develop a charter in one day. This is just the first step. And then you get someone who takes those values and turns, maybe 2 or 3 people on your team who'd be willing to go away and craft a 1-page charter that consists of the 5 to 7 most important expectations that we've identified. What will our agreements be with regard to these expectations? You bring it back to the group. You might have to refine it. It might take 2 or 3 months of meetings to get this team charter underway. And then how will we deal with it? And this is the critical question. How will we deal with it respectfully and honestly if someone knowingly or unknowingly dishonors our agreements? If we get it, and it's going to predominantly be unknowingly. If it's perceived that we've misaligned with our charter, then how will we talk about it? How will we deal with that? And then we get ourselves aligned around how we'll deal with it if people feel like that team is out of sync. Okay. And then you create a 1-page document that outlines the expectations and agreement that everyone makes to each other that will be used to keep everyone on track. And then it's not the positional leader's job to do this. It's the team, and the team can do this. And, you can reassess it's not something you put on your website, but you have a team charter that comes to perhaps every team meeting. And you say, how are we doing with our team charter? What needs corrections? What are we doing right? You can shine the light on those stories. And I just say that, when it comes to this teamwork, it comes back to relationships. And are we making deposits with each other, or are we making withdrawals? Every person on your team, think of people on your team right now. It's like a bank account. Are you in the black with them or are you in the pink? And you know what? Maybe if you do nothing out of this session today, maybe the only thing that you take away is, where on my team do I need to make some deposits? Where do I need to show some appreciation? Where do I need to give some recognition? Where do I need to be a better listener? Where can I have a little more empathy for someone on our team that maybe there's some conflict that I need to sit down and take responsibility to make some deposits. We all make withdrawals inadvertently. And we need to be particularly attentive to this in a virtual world where we just don't have that connection is easily, but you can avoid this in person as well. Then the language of appreciation, we all have a different language. And Gary Chapman wrote a book years ago on the language of love. Well, the same thing with teams is that some people love words. Some people love quality time. Some people acts of service where we're working on a project together. Doesn't matter to me that you tell me I'm doing a good job. Let's just work on a project that we're having some success. Some people need gifts. Some people are hugs and handshake people, and some people don't like to be touched. And you need to know your team enough to know, where can I make some deposits in the next month? And if you get nothing out of this talk this morning, then maybe a plan that you can individually say, where do I need to maybe do some better listening? Maybe what I need to do to have more empathy, where I need to understand what their language of appreciation. The other thing that I talk about when we talk about team charter is the renting box, the victim box, and ownership. Blaming versus claiming, problem. So, contaminating, this is gossiping. And so this can be a part of your team charter, is to examine this one page and say, you know what, we're going to be loyal. Here's one of the expectations that we have. We're going to be loyal in people's absence. We're not going to gossip about each other. That's an expectation that could go on your team charter. We're going to live outside of this victim box, and we're going to hold each other accountable. It's not just the positional leader's job to do this. We're going to hold each other accountable. That, frankly, I've had people say when they're in the victim box, that's a language that we can begin to use. Well, you know what? We'll complain for a while, but then you understand the difference between venting and complaining. Venting has a beginning and an end. It's contained. Versus complaining. Excuse me, I just grab some water. Talking too long. I can tell. That's my limit. So contaminating says, we don't have boundaries. We just, when we're in a bad mood, we make everybody in a bad mood. Triangulating is about gossiping, talking about people behind their back. These are simple actions that we can take to make deposits and can live up to the expectation on a team charter. And again, we could spend a lot more time on this, but I just thought I'd introduce you to it. So I just wanted to end by saying that we've done this with our own family. This is what got us through our raising. We had three adolescent, three daughters, and this is what got us through raising our kids, is that we came up with a team charter in our own family. We had a conversation about, hey, my kids used to sit down with me when they were adolescents and would evaluate me on how I'm doing as a father with our values. These are the values that we used in our family, and it just led to some conversation. It's not perfect, but it really got us through, leading us through raising these daughters. All right. Well, that's my presentation. Again, I want to remind you, if you want to sign up, if you want to go deeper into this material and learn how to be a more authentic leader in this whole work, I would encourage you to just investigate and research more deeply this whole Leadership Academy. We've got an early bird rate that's still available for the next couple of weeks. I know Val has put the links in the chat room for you. Okay, so on that note, I am going to stop sharing. We are going to stop the recording.